She's a business mogul, #1 author, and wellness expert.
How can I help?
And now Chantel Ray Finch and her amazing guests are here to guide you on your journey to health, wealth, and godly wisdom.
Time to level up.
Welcome to the Health, Wealth, and Godly Wisdom podcast.
All right. Well, we're talking about how to sell your business for top dollar. And, a lot of entrepreneurs, don't become an entrepreneur because they want to be the next Elon Musk. It's actually because they crave in their gut at the most visceral level possible freedom. And today we're going to talk about all of the different motivations of why someone wants to create a business and sell a business. And we also need to talk about what you can do to make your business the most sellable and for top dollar. And one of the first things that you want to do is to figure out what you do better than anyone else. And I will tell you that there's so many times where people come to me and they say, I need you to sell my business. And I say to them, I don't know how to tell you this, but I can't sell your company because there's nothing to sell. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they start cross-selling. And so we're going to talk about cross-selling. We're going to talk about the subscription-based model and so much more. So let's dive right in. I do want to tell you what got me really passionate about helping businesses to grow, scale, and exit. And one of it is one of the businesses that I built. When I decided that I wanted to sell it, it was really hard for me to understand that something that I spent 20 years building wasn't worth as much as I thought it was worth at the time. And I put so much of my time and energy into it. And so now I'm so passionate about teaching all the people, everyone, what I learned on what is going to make it a sellable business. And like I said, I can't tell you how many businesses that I meet with and I'm like, I can't sell your company because there's nothing to sell. It's worthless. And it's like I'm punching people in the stomach because I'm literally walking. They're coming into my office. They're rubbing their hands together thinking they're sitting on this multi-million-dollar business. And they realize all the mistakes that they were putting into their business. And one of the biggest mistakes is that they were involved in everything. It was like, who's in charge of selling? They were. Who was in charge of the marketing? They were. Who was in charge of this? It was all wrapped around that CEO. And if they left the company, guess what? It was worth nothing. So one of the things that I always tell people is that you want to figure out what you can do better than anyone else. What is the one offering, the one product, the one service that you can do better than anyone else? And, when an acquirer looks at buying your business, they're going to shake your hand and smile and tell you all the wonderful things about your business. And then they're going to go close the boardroom door and you won't be invited. And they're going to look at their colleagues and say, should we buy this company or should we compete with it? And if they're going to compete what you've done and what you've built, and they can easily do it, and they can compete with you by lowering the price, then they're going to just say, forget it. We don't need to go ahead and buy this business. It's going to cost them, X amount. And they're like, we can build it for cheaper. But if they look at it and they say, look, it's going to cost me too long and too much money to try to build what you've created, that's what you want to kind of build. So when you're thinking, is my business sellable? That's one of the things you need to think about. And Warren Buffett talks about the competitive moat. And he likes to have businesses with that deep and wide competitive moat. And those businesses are the most acquirable because you've got pricing authority and you can create a cycle that comes with pricing authority with higher margins and so forth. So it really comes down to one thing that you can dominate on. And I want to give you some examples so that you can think about what is those things. So some people call it the blue ocean. I've heard people call it that. And it's just the one thing that you do better than anyone else. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see people do is they start cross-selling. And what that means is they go to a conference or they read some book and they say, it's 8 times cheaper and easier to cross-sell to an existing customer, a new product, a new service, than it is to find new customers. So what they do is they say, okay, let me just find someone to cross-sell. But let me give you a perfect example of someone who decided not to cross-sell. The lady's name is, I listened to her on a podcast, and the lady's name is Stephanie Breedlove. And she built a company and she kind of came to a fork in the road. She was at $300,000 of annual revenue. And it was kind of a weird business that is kind of strange, but she did payroll for parents who have a nanny to pay, right? So if someone was a W-2 and you were like, look, I want to legitimately pay them as a W-2, but I don't have the means to do it. So that's all she did. Talk about very niche, however you like to say it, business. But what she said is, okay, right now I have a fork in the road because it was getting harder for her to find parents who have a nanny to pay for. So she had 2 choices. She can either cross-sell to her existing customers, another service, busy parents, 2-income kids, stuff like that. Or she could say, okay, well, what do these people need? They need meal delivery. They need snow removal. They need lawn care. They need a pool service person because these are busy parents and they need all these other things. And she decided, a lot of people were chirping in her ear that it would be a lot easier for her to cross-sell her existing companies. And she just decided that she didn't want to do that. She wanted to stick with her original plan. And what happened was she actually decided to go to care.com. And care.com, if you've never heard of it, it's just got a bunch of babysitters that are rated 5-star and people that'll come and take care of your kids. And so she said, look, she went to care.com and said, look, 1% of you, they had 7 million customers or something. And she ended up going to them, and care.com actually purchased that business that Breedlab, had created. And she never would have done that if she would have watered down what she was doing, right? So even though that was so niche, she ended up selling it. So that's one of the things that I am seeing that people are doing wrong, is that they're doing too much cross-selling and not staying with their niche. So one of the things I say is that if you want income and you just want a lot of people, they want short-term profits. So in their mind, they're so short-term thinking, that's what makes them go cross-sell to their existing customers. But if you want to build a valuable business, cross-selling is actually one of the first ways to undermine the value of that business. So that's just something to think about when you're doing it. I'll give you another business that I want to give you an example of that. There was 2 companies that I have talked to and met with, and one of them did cross-selling and one that didn't. And the one that didn't do cross-selling, he ended up selling his business for about 4 times what the guy who did cross-selling is. So that's just another piece to think about. So one of the things that I want to mention right now is talking about how to really think about, there's this guy that talks about the differentiators of businesses. And so if you want to make your business different than anyone else, that is one of the things that you have to really focus on, taking the time to figure out what is your niche. And so in general, if your business is between 1 and 10, probably 2 and 10 million or 2 and 20 million in annual revenue, that actually is where a lot of people now can look into private equity groups. So private equity groups are looking for businesses that are about 2 million plus, and they're actually starting to go down even more, possibly down to 1 million. But if you're looking at trying to sell to a private equity group, This is the biggest thing that I want to tell you. They want you to sell 60% and they want you to carry 40% equity. So I will tell you, if you say, no, I want 100% out, then I'm telling you private equity is not the way to go. So the reason is because they think if you carry 40% equity, then they actually want you to work in the business usually for at least 3 to 5 years. So let's talk about some of the benefits of that first. So the benefit of using, private equity is that they actually, they don't have managers, right? So when you sell your company to a private equity group, you have to stick around, and you'll, if you want to stick around for the next 3 to 5 years, then that's not a bad idea. But the problem is, let me go with the upside first. The upside is there's a term that we use as business brokers, and it's called the second bite of the apple. And people use it all the time. And basically what it means is that you sell your first tranche of equity, let's say 60% at a certain multiple. And then downstream, the second tranche of your equity at 40% gets up to being worth more because the private equity group has professionalized your business, right? That's what they basically tell you. You're going to work in the business for the next 3 to 5 years. We're going to build the value up. And now that you're getting a second bite of the apple that's getting more money later on. And that's the pitch that they're going to give you. The downside of that pitch is that when you do that deal, you now are a minority shareholder. And I'm going to tell you a real nightmare story of someone that I heard that did this. They had a private equity group. He sold it for 60% and he decided to carry 40%. But here's the problem. Listen, he was completely done. He was like, I don't want to run it anymore. But when he first told them, he was willing to stay on. But then after like a few months, he was like, I'm wiping my hands from this. I can't do it anymore. So the private equity group brought in a CEO. Well, the CEO didn't really know how to run the business or the industry. He knew nothing about it. And so guess what? The company just started to tank. And what they do is they have a line of credit that the private equity does. And the bank yanked the line of the credit and the company went bankrupt. And so his 40% went to zero. So I just want to give you the nightmare stories so you understand there could be a huge upside if you sell to up private equity, but there's a huge significant downside if you get it wrong. And if you don't want to stay in the business, it is far more riskier just from that example that I just gave you. So I just want you to really, really think about that when you're deciding whether you want to go with a large private equity group. Now, let's talk about a strategic investor, because that's a totally different thing that I want you to understand, that that's one of the reasons why people decide to buy, and it's for a strategic acquisition. And it's when you have some strategic reason to buy the business. And I'll give you a perfect example. It's my favorite example of a guy named Blinds, from a guy who created blinds.com. And I just love this story, but he, started with blinds.com. His wife had a blinds business, and then he ended up creating blinds.com, which became the #1 online blind store. And so they got it, really got it up to #1. And guess who started looking at it? And the strategic acquirer was Home Depot. And Home Depot had two obvious problems. #1, they were having their lunch eaten by blinds.com in the blinds category, right? Because blinds.com was #1. And #2, they were actually being outcompeted in the area of, when you go to homedepot.com, when you're buying things, think about blinds. Like, blinds are not really an easy thing. It's not like buying a book on Amazon, right? Like you have to measure it, you have to make sure it fits. And so not only was he, Jay Steinfeld is the guy's name, and not only was he number one in dominating in the blinds category, but he had figured the secret sauce for how to sell complicated products that needed to be installed online. Like you buy it online, but then you have to get it installed, right? And so what does Home Depot have? Home Depot has, $100 billion worth of stuff that's complicated that needs to be installed. So not only they wanted to be number one in the blinds category, but they wanted to figure out, okay, where did he get his expertise and his knowledge of how to sell complicated things across the board? Because if you're going to install blinds, it's probably the same way that you're going to install like a cabinet. There's similarities, right? So they had a strategic reason to buy blinds.com. And so that's what I want you to really understand, that story of why they were able to sell for such a high multiple. So that's just something to think about. And one of the things that when you're looking for a strategic partner to come in, sometimes you might sell 20% equity, sometimes 30%. But one of the things, and they might like blinds.com. I think he stayed on for about 4 to 5 years afterwards, which is really, really important, is to get whatever company, if you can get them to stay on, it really is a good thing. And I think he ended up staying for about 4 to 5 years. But one of the things that I want to really tell you about is I had a friend who actually, it was called Kazam Bikes. She lived in Virginia Beach. And I asked her and she told me I could share her information. Her name is Mary Beth Lugo. She was on Shark Tank. And she ended up doing a deal with one of the Shark Tank guys, and she had a very good experience. She ended up selling the whole company afterwards. But I also had another friend that did a deal with Shark Tank, and she did it with Robert Herjavec. And he actually ended up selling for 15%. And she never actually spoke with him she never even spoke to him ever. Like she was like, I never even spoke to him. I sold 15%. It made a little bit of a difference. So when you're deciding whether you're going to sell to like a Shark Tank, or something like that, the biggest thing is, what are they going to do for you that you cannot do for yourself? And make sure that you understand, like one friend that I told you about that worked with Robert Herjavec, she's like, in my mind, I was like, thinking, here, I've got this partner with Robert, and she never spoke to him ever once. Like she never even saw him. While my other friend that sold the Kazam Bikes, she worked with the guy with the Mavericks, and she actually did talk with him, and he was a little bit more involved. So let's kind of talk about when you're working with a strategic partnership. One of the things you need to ask is, what is this person going to bring to the table besides money? And that's a really important thing. At one point when I was going to sell one of my companies, I want to give you a story. And this was my real estate company. And back then it was Chantel Ray Real Estate. And I was thinking about, there was a company that came in and asked to buy my company at that time. I was probably about 10 years into the business. And I did have a meeting with them. And when I met with them, I said, well, tell me, what are you going to do to grow Chantel Ray Real Estate? And when he told me his ideas, and of course they were not in real estate. They had nothing to do with real estate. And it was one of the most asinine ideas that I don't even want to go into what he had suggested of how he was going to grow the company. But I was thinking, if we ended up selling to them, they would have taken that company and completely tanked it, So if you've been running your business for 10 years, you probably know it better than anyone else, right? And while they might have some experience to bring, it is really worth vetting that company. And I just want you to know, it's not that I'm not a fan of selling where it's 60% and letting 40% ride, or just selling 10 to 15%. But my mindset is I want to help you to build a business that you can one day sell 100% of it. That's what I'm telling you, is that I believe that with the coaching that we can give you and with our team of what we have, we've got a team of professionals. They know all of our strategies. And I just want you to know there's a lot of sharks out there that want to kind of tell you what you want to hear. And I want you to be aware of when you sell 15% or 40%, it can be a disaster. I want to kind of talk about a couple of things about primary motivations for why someone wants to sell their company. So one of the things that, if you think about it, is freedom. And, I created something called Finch Freedom because I believe that one of the biggest things that people want more than anything is freedom. And you don't want to go from, when you sell a percentage of your business, you go from one day being an entrepreneur to the next day you're an employee and you're like, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I didn't sign up to, now back to being an employee again. And when you sign up these contracts for, you have to stay in the business to 4 to 5 years, you are now an employee. And I've seen it. People are unhappy, and they created this business to have freedom. And now they have everything but freedom. And so I want to kind of talk about, there's 4 reasons of why someone becomes an entrepreneur, and for you to decide which one are you. So one of them is, let's say I call them the mountain people. And that is, their biggest goal is to just get to the top of the mountain. So like someone like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, like they want to build something so big that they want to get to the top of the mountain. And it's like, people that want to go into space. It's like the challenge of doing it. They don't need the money. Then the second one, I call it FU money. And that is, their primary motivation is complete independence, but they're motivated by FU money. They get to decide when to work, who to work for, what they do, but they just want to have that FU money. The third one is the freedom people, and their primary motivation is just independence. Back to they want the ability to decide when to work, who to work for, when they feel like doing it. If they want to take off 2 weeks and go to the beach, they can do that. And then the last one is what I call just someone who wants to be number one at whatever their field is. And so they just want to be like the best at this. And they are really big on finding that. And so I think when you decide first, what is my motivation to become an entrepreneur and what is it that I actually want, that will help you to understand which way you want to go when you decide to be, how you want to sell your business. And I think most of the people that I have interviewed, when I ask them that question, they say it's the freedom for them. They say, I don't want to work Saturdays. I don't want to work Sundays. I want the freedom to do whatever I want when I want it. And when I ask most of the entrepreneurs. And so if that's you, then you don't want to take the 10%, the 20%, the 40% of the business. You want to grow your business so that you can sell it to the 100%. So let's see. Now I want to kind of talk to you about roll-ups, okay? Because that is one thing that we are helping businesses with over and over again. We just have someone that just bought about 5 HVAC units. HVAC companies rolled them all up into one and then turned around and sold it for an even higher multiple. So my dad is actually a doctor. He has a doctor practice where they have multiple practices and they're rolling them all together, and then they can sell them down the road. But if you think about just a medical practice, right? You probably only need one. If you start buying other medical practices that you can add onto this, and this is the roll-up scenario, you probably only need one head office person, right? You don't need someone to answer all of the phone calls and schedule appointments. You could have one person that covers it for 10 locations, right? There's also a win in buying power. So like when they buy medical equipment or lights or chairs, you get rebates on the volume. So that's really important as well. And so instead of paying, $2,000 for a medical piece of equipment, you might pay, $1,000 for it. And so that is a really big thing, is that now you can really kind of open your eyes to going, if I can buy other businesses that are in my field, and then I can take it and roll them up into one, I can reduce the cost so I don't have to have so many people, then you end up really being able to sell the whole thing at what we call a roll-up, and can sell it for a lot higher of a multiple. So if you want to find out how we can help you find businesses that are already, let's say you have a spa practice and you can buy 5 other spas, roll them up, and then sell the whole thing, that's one of the things that's really important. So when I talk about the coaching that we do with people, one of the things that I am super proud of is what we're doing with the automation of doing. I'll give you an example for a car wash, right? So if you think about a car wash, remember the old days? I don't know. I'm like really dating myself here, but I remember when you used to get a tank of gas and you actually get a free car wash. Like we had a gas station right near us and you actually got a free car wash when you did that. And so there's something where there's called recurring revenue. And then there's also something called reoccurring revenue. Those are 2 totally separate things that I want you to be really, really aware of, because recurring revenue is actually, reoccurring is like a rash. Like you don't know when it's going to come. It just reoccurs and you just get it. Recurring is where every month you're getting some amount of money from this customer. And that is what we love to help coach people to figure out how you can create this recurring revenue. So, for example, with the car wash. So now if you go to a car wash, almost all car washes now are doing this model. It's a subscription-based model where it's an all you can eat, basically, all you can wash your car in a month. So it's, you pay $30 and you can go every day of the week if you want. There's no extra no extra charge. It's unlimited car wash because it's a subscription model. And so you might say, well, why would they do that? And it's making those companies so much more valuable because acquirers value subscription revenue, recurring revenue, not transactional revenue, at least not to the same extent. So that industry has been completely changed because almost every one of them are now doing recurring revenue. So, the SaaS model, a lot of you guys have known about that. That's a big one. But I want to give you another example. I have a good friend of ours that has it's so funny. When you look at him, he's the CEO of a flower company. And I tell him all the time, like, if you look at him, he just has such a swagger about him, but I don't know why, but he doesn't look like he's the CEO of a flower company. But if the flower company, in my opinion, is one of the hardest companies that you can possibly think of. And one of the reasons is because selling flowers, I think, is one of the hardest because, first of all, Think about it. Flowers, the farmer cuts the flower off the stem, it starts to die immediately. And the typical flower store throws out 50% of its inventory. And why? Because it's just rotting dead in the refrigerator if someone doesn't buy it. And seasonality wise, Mother's Day and Valentine's Day is when 30% of the flowers get purchased. So you've got 363 other days of the year that you have to randomly try to sell flowers to. So you either have to get like a really expensive place where people are walking by all the time. But there is this flower company that I'm so impressed with. And what they did is they didn't try to look at Mother's Day, weddings and funerals and graduations. They said, who could we sell the subscription business to? And what they decided to do is sell it to 5-star hotels like the St. Regis, like the Four Seasons. And when you go into those hotels, think about it. They literally have fresh flowers there all the time. There was a hotel near my house when I lived in Virginia Beach. It was called the Cavalier. Every time you walked in, they had fresh flowers, a different set of fresh flowers in their front every single time. Well, again, if you sell to those companies, that's the way to do it. And when you think about like ADT or one of the places that do the security, just so you know, the way that it works is when you're selling that to figure out what it's worth, the money that you use that the people make when they're doing the security system, they basically would say, okay, if you go hook up the system and that cost $1,000, then we give that one value. But if the monthly recurring value, we pay 3 to 4 times that amount, right? So that is a really big deal for you to come up with, the transactional revenue. That is the installation revenue that they charge to come in and install the system in your house. But that recurring subscription that's say $39 a month to monitor the system, ADT or Chubb or whoever you use. So the typical acquirer will pay about 75 cents to $1 for every dollar of installation revenue. But they're going to pay $3 to $4 for every dollar of monitoring revenue because it's recurring. So that's why when we meet with you, we really figure out how do you get to this recurring model. And believe it or not, we've been able to do it with every business, but you need someone who can look at it from the higher level to be able to figure out what is that recurring revenue that we can get in that space. So let's see. Now I want to switch gears and I want to talk about how important it is for you to not be involved in your business. And one of the jokes that we have is we call it, you want to be Switzerland. And the reason why we say that is because if you look at every country, Switzerland is like a little blip besides France, Germany, and Italy. And, they should be part of the European Union and they don't even use the euro currency. So they are very like, we're Switzerland, And so one of the things that you want to make sure is that you are Switzerland in the sense that you don't want to have too much reliance on a single customer, a single supplier, or a single employee, which most of the time it's the CEO, but there's lots of time that there's certain employees that they couldn't live without. And so I'll tell you about a company that they sold every bit of their business. They didn't have any other business but to Amazon. And I know that one of the companies was like, if you ever get shut down from Amazon, that could be a red flag. So any dependency on a single customer, a single employee, or a single supplier, you only have one way to get a supply, then if that shuts down, then guess what? The company goes under. So it's really important to make sure that you have those things in check. And that's one of the checklists that we go over and look at. So I just wanted to kind of go over all of these things, and hopefully you got tons out of it of what you can do to sell your business for top dollar. We love to kind of talk with you on how we can really tweak some things to help you get the most amount of money. So we'd love to meet with you and have you meet with one of our team members. So if this sounds interesting to you, book a free call and we'd love to chit chat with you. So there's 3 things that we help businesses do. Number 1, we teach them to grow, scale, and exit. So if they're thinking about exiting, if they don't want to sell right now, it's okay, but we want to get them to the steps that they need to go ahead and exit their business. Then we can also give you an evaluation of what your business is worth right now. And then we say, hey, if you do these particular steps, then we know we can get you to exit and sell your business for a lot more than what it's currently worth. We can help you with business coaching, we can help you sell your business, or we can do a combination of both.